The cubs knew something was wrong the moment their mother did not return from the meeting, and Vareth was the first to start pacing back and forth across the room with his claws, leaving small scratches on the metal floor. He was old enough to understand what danger meant and young enough to still believe that his mother was invincible. So when the human security captain came into the room and told them that their mother was sick, Vareth did not believe him at first. "You are lying." The young Varax snarled, and his scales bristled up to make himself look bigger. "My mother is the strongest warrior in the Dominion, and she does not get sick." Marcus looked at the young predator and saw something he recognized from his own childhood, which was the fear of a child who had just learned that parents could be hurt. And he felt his heart soften, despite the fact that this child could probably take his hand off with one bite. "She is sick," Marcus said in a calm and steady voice. "But our doctor is very good, and she's going to make your mother better. And while that is happening, I am going to stay here with you and your brother and sister." Sirth had pressed herself into the corner of the room and was making a low keening sound that the translator could not quite capture, but that Marcus understood anyway, because grief and fear sounded the same in any language. The baby Kethril did not understand what was happening at all, and he kept looking at the door and chirping for his mother. And the sound was so sad that one of the human guards had to look away because her eyes were filling with tears. "I do not need your protection," Voreth growled, and he bared his fangs at Marcus in a display that would have made most creatures back away in terror. "I am Varax, and I can protect my siblings myself." Marcus did something then that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. He sat down on the floor, not in a chair, because that would still put him above the cubs, but right on the hard metal floor so that he was at their level. And he crossed his legs and rested his hands on his knees and looked at Voreth without any challenge in his eyes. "I know you can," Marcus said, "and I can see that you are brave and strong, and that you love your brother and sister very much. But right now your mother asked us to help protect you, and helping is what humans do." Vareth was confused, because this was not how prey was supposed to behave when a predator showed dominance. The prey was supposed to run or submit or try to fight. But this human was doing none of those things, and instead he was just sitting there like he had all the time in the world, and like Varath's fangs did not scare him at all. "Why would you help us?" Voreth asked, and some of the anger had left his voice, replaced by genuine curiosity. "We are predators, and you are prey, and that is how the universe works." Marcus smiled, and it was a real smile, not a nervous one, and he shook his head slowly. "We are not prey," he said, "and you are not just predators. Not to me anyway, because right now you are 3 scared kids whose mother is in the hospital, and I have been a scared kid before, so I know how that feels." Sirth had stopped her keening and was watching the human with wide eyes, and even baby Kethril had paused in his chirping to look at the strange creature who was sitting on their floor. "Your mother is going to be fine," Marcus continued, "and while she is resting, we are going to make sure nothing, and I mean nothing, touches a single scale on your heads. And that is not because we have to, or because of the treaty, but because it is the right thing to do." The room was quiet for a long moment, then baby Kethril did something that changed everything. He tottered over to Marcus on his stubby little legs, and he sniffed at the human with his small snout, and then he climbed right into Marcus's lap and curled up there like it was the most natural thing in the world. Marcus held very still, because he knew that this was a test even if Kethril did not know it. And he could feel Varath's eyes burning into him, waiting for him to make a wrong move. And he understood that if he did anything to hurt or scare the baby, then the older cub would attack him, treaty or no treaty. But Marcus had nieces and nephews back on Earth, and he knew how to hold small things that trusted him, so he very gently put one hand on Kethril's back and the other on the floor to brace himself, and he let the baby predator sleep. Kethril made a sound that was almost like purring, and his small claws kneaded at Marcus's uniform. And within minutes, he was completely asleep. "He likes you," Sirth said in a small voice, and she had crept closer without anyone noticing. "He does not like anyone except Mother and me and Vareth." "I am honored," Marcus said. And he meant it. Vareth was still standing apart from the group, but his scales had flattened back down, and his claws were no longer extended. And he was looking at the human with an expression that might have been respect. "My mother said that humans were weak," Vareth said slowly. "She said that you have no claws and no fangs and no scales, and that we could kill you all if we wanted to. She's right about the claws and fangs and scales." Marcus agreed. "But she might be wrong about the weak part. How can you be strong without weapons?" Marcus thought about the question for a moment, and he thought about all the things he could say about human history and human wars and human stubbornness. But then he looked at the sleeping baby in his lap, and he knew the real answer. "We are strong because we do not give up," he said. "And we are strong because we protect each other. And we are strong because when we see someone who needs help, we help them, even if it is hard or scary, or even if they have claws and fangs and could probably eat us." Sirth had gotten close enough to touch now, and she reached out one small clawed hand and poked Marcus on the arm, like she was testing to see if he was real. "You are very warm," she said with surprise. "Warmer than Varax. Humans run hot," Marcus said with a smile. "It is one of the few things we are good at." Sirth looked at her older brother, and some silent communication passed between them. And then she did something that made Marcus's heart squeeze in his chest. She curled up against his side, just like Kethril had done, and she put her head on his shoulder, and she closed her eyes. "You may guard us," she said in a sleepy voice, "but only because Kethril likes you, and Kethril is a good judge of character." Vareth stood alone for a while longer, watching, judging, trying to understand how this human had won his siblings over so quickly. But he was tired too, and scared too. And he was still young enough to need comfort, even if he would never admit it. So when Marcus patted the floor beside him and said, "There's room for one more," Vareth told himself that he was only sitting down because he needed to stay close to guard his siblings, and if he happened to lean against the warm human just a little bit, well, that was only because the room was cold. The other human guards watched this scene with wonder, and they sent messages to their friends and family about what they were seeing, and word began to spread through the station that the terrifying Vorax cubs had fallen asleep in a pile with a human security captain. No one who heard the story quite believed it, but it was true, and somewhere in the medical bay, Dr. Chun was fighting to save the life of a predator queen while her children slept peacefully under the protection of creatures their mother had called prey. The universe was strange sometimes, and this was one of those times when it was strange in a beautiful way. The ship came down through the clouds of Earth Station Meridian like a blade cutting through silk, and everyone who watched it land felt their hearts beat a little faster because they knew what was inside Ambassador Kethrix of the Varax Dominion was not like other diplomats who came to human space. And she made sure everyone understood this from the moment her ship touched the landing pad. And the doors opened with a hiss of pressurized air that smelled like copper and something else that made the human welcoming committee take a step back without meaning to. She stood at nearly 8 feet tall with scales the color of dried blood covering her entire body. And her eyes were golden with vertical slits that seemed to look right through anyone who met her gaze. And her claws were as long as human fingers and twice as sharp. And her teeth were visible even when her mouth was closed because they were simply too large to hide. The Varax were apex predators from a death world where everything that lived had to kill to survive. And they had conquered 12-star systems not through technology or clever diplomacy, but through being so terrifying that most species simply surrendered rather than face them in battle. But what made the human delegation gasp was not the ambassador herself. It was the 3 small figures that followed her down the ramp. Cubs. She had brought her children, to Earth Station Meridian. And this was something no one had expected because the Varaks were famous for guarding their young with a ferocity that bordered on madness. And they never ever brought them to alien worlds. The eldest cub was named Vorith, and he was already showing the signs of the predator he would become, with scales that were darker than his mother's, and eyes that watched everything with a hunter's focus. And he walked with his small claws clicking on the metal floor like he owned it. The middle cub was called Sirth, and she was quieter than her brother, but no less dangerous looking. And she stayed close to her mother's leg and hissed softly at any human who looked at her too long. The youngest was barely more than a baby, still soft and rounded in the way that all young creatures are soft and rounded. And his name was Kethril, and he kept trying to chase his own tail, which was something that made several humans smile despite their fear. Captain Marcus Webb was the head of security for the station, and he had seen a lot of strange things in his 20 years of service. But watching a Varak's cub try to catch its own tail while its mother looked on with what might have been embarrassment was definitely a new experience. Ambassador Kethrix, the human secretary, long said with a bow that was carefully calculated to show respect without submission because the Varaks despised weakness. "We welcome you to Earth Station Meridian, and we are honored that you have brought your family." Kethrix made a sound deep in her throat that the translator rendered as acknowledgement, and her golden eyes swept across the gathered humans like she was counting how many she could kill if she needed to. "The summit will take 40 cycles," she said in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "And Vorak's tradition demands that future leaders witness the making of treaties. So my cubs are here to learn." What she did not say was that she had also brought them, because leaving them on the homeworld while she was gone was unthinkable. And every Varax knew that a mother who abandoned her cubs, even to trusted family, was no true mother at all. The humans led to delegation to the diplomatic quarters, which had been specially prepared with higher temperatures and meat that was still raw and furniture that could handle the weight of a full-grown Varax without breaking. Marcus stayed at his post outside the door and tried not to think about the fact that there were now 4 apex predators sleeping just a few meters away from him, and he wondered what his mother would say if she knew her son was guarding alien killing machines. The first 3 days passed without incident. Rix attended meetings and argued about trade routes and military boundaries and all the boring things that diplomats argued about. And her cubs stayed in the quarters with a rotating guard of human security officers who tried very hard not to show how nervous they were. On the 4th day, everything changed. It started with a caucus. Rix had been in a meeting about mineral rights when she suddenly doubled over, and a sound came from her throat that made every human in the room freeze, because it was the sound of something breaking inside her. Scales had gone pale, and her golden eyes were wild with pain and fear. And she tried to stand, but her legs would not hold her. "My cubs," she gasped as she fell. "Protect my cubs." The station's medical team arrived within minutes, and Dr. Sarah Chun took one look at the readings and felt her stomach drop because she knew exactly what was happening. "Ruptured venom sac," she said to her team. "The toxins are flooding her system, and if we do not operate within the next 6 hours, she will die." The problem was that there were no Varak surgeons on the station, and the nearest one was 6 jump gates away, which would take at least 2 days. And Kethrix did not have 2 days. Dr. Chun had studied Varak's anatomy because she believed that a good doctor should know how to help anyone who might walk through her door. And she had practiced on simulations and read every medical text she could find. But she had never actually operated on a living Vorax. She stood beside the ambassador's bed and looked down at the predator, who was now trembling with pain. And she made a decision. "Ambassador, I can do the surgery, and I have studied your species, and I believe I can save you. But you would have to trust me with your life." Kethrix's eyes focused on the small human female who stood before her. And she saw something there that she had not expected to see. She saw no fear. "My children," Kethrix whispered because the pain was making it hard to speak. "Who will guard them while I am unconscious? Because I cannot protect them if I am sleeping, and there are those who would harm them to harm me." Marcus stepped forward then. And he did not ask permission, and he did not wait to be invited. And he looked the dying predator in the eye, and spoke with a voice that did not shake. "We will guard them, Ambassador. And by we, I mean every human on this station. And I give you my word that nothing will touch your cubs while you are in surgery." Kethrix stared at him for a long moment, and every instinct in her body screamed that this was wrong. Because you did not trust prey species with your young, and you did not show weakness to aliens, and you certainly did not put your children's lives in the hands of creatures you could kill with one swipe of your claws. But she had no choice. "If they are harmed," she said with the last of her strength, "I will tear this station apart with my bare claws, and everyone on it will die screaming." "Understood," Marcus said, and he meant it. And somehow that made Kethrix trust him just a little bit more. She closed her eyes and let the doctors take her away. And the last thing she saw before the sedatives pulled her under was the human security captain walking toward her children's quarters with a look on his face that she had only ever seen on Varax. Mother's, it was the look of someone who had decided that nothing in the universe would harm what they were protecting, and Kethrix wondered as the darkness took her if perhaps she had misjudged these soft little humans after all. The attack came at hour 16 when the station was quiet, and most of the crew was sleeping, and the only sounds were the hum of the life support systems and the soft breathing of 3 Varax cubs who had made a nest out of blankets, and one human security captain. Marcus was not sleeping. He had learned a long time ago how to rest without truly letting his guard down. And something in the back of his mind had been screaming at him for the last hour that something was wrong, even if he could not say what it was. The first sign of trouble was the lights flickering just once, just for a second, but that was enough to make Marcus open his eyes and reach for his weapon. The second sign was the sound of boots in the corridor outside. Boots that were moving too fast and too quiet to be regular station security. The third sign was when the door exploded inward. Marcus was already moving before the smoke cleared, and he grabbed Kethril with one arm and shoved Varth and Sirth behind him with the other. And he put himself between the cubs and the 3 figures that came through the destroyed doorway. They were Drellick's mercenaries, and Marcus knew them by their gray skin and their 4 arms and the plasma rifles they carried. And he also knew that Drellics did not take jobs unless the pay was very, very good. "Move aside, human," the lead mercenary said in a voice that buzzed like insects. "We are not here for you. We only want the cubs. And if you step aside, we will let you live." Marcus looked at the 3 armed killers who stood between him and the corridor, and he looked at the 3 small predators who were huddled behind him, shaking with fear. And he made a decision that was not really a decision at all, because there was only one thing he could do. "No," he said. The Drellic seemed surprised by this answer, and the leader tilted his head like he was trying to understand the puzzle. "You would die for alien children?" he asked. "Children of predators who would eat your kind if they were hungry enough?" "Yes," Marcus said. And his voice did not shake, even though his hands wanted to. The mercenary shrugged with all 4 of his shoulders. "Then you will die first." The plasma bolt hit Marcus in the left shoulder, and the pain was like nothing he had ever felt before. Like his entire arm was being burned away from the inside. And he stumbled back, but he did not fall. He could not fall, because if he fell, there would be nothing between the cubs and the killers. So Marcus stood. He raised his own weapon with his good arm, and he fired back. And his first shot took the lead mercenary in the chest and dropped him to the ground. And his second shot went wide, because his vision was going gray at the edges. But he was not alone. The other human guards had heard the explosion, and they were coming. And Engineer Yuki was the first to arrive. And she did not have a weapon, but she had something better. She had access to the station's emergency systems with 3 quick commands. She sealed the corridor behind the mercenaries with blast doors that were designed to withstand hull breaches. And suddenly the attackers were trapped between Marcus and a wall of solid metal. "You cannot escape," Yuki said over the intercom. And her voice was calm even though her hands were shaking. "Surrender now, and you might live." The 2 remaining mercenaries did not surrender. One of them turned to fire at the blast door, which was stupid because that door could take hits from a ship's cannon. And the other one raised his weapon to finish Marcus off. That was when Beatrice arrived. Beatrice was 63 years old, and she had been the station's head cook for 15 years. And she had survived 3 pirate attacks and 1 hull breach. And 1 very bad case of food poisoning that had swept through the crew after someone brought back alien shellfish from shore leave. She had also brought her cast iron pan from Earth because some things you did not leave behind no matter how far from home you traveled. The mercenary did not see her coming because he was focused on Marcus. And by the time he heard her footsteps, it was too late. The pan connected with the back of his head with a sound like a bell being rung, and he went down hard. And when he tried to get back up, Beatrice hit him again. "Stay down," she said in the voice she used when crew members tried to sneak extra dessert. "I mean it." He stayed down. The last mercenary saw his companions fallen, and he saw the blast door behind him, and he saw the humans gathering in the corridor, and something in his 4 eyes changed from confidence to fear. He dropped his weapon and raised all 4 of his hands. "I surrender," he said. "Please do not let the old one hit me with the cooking implement." Station security arrived then. Proper security with proper weapons and proper armor. And they took the surviving mercenaries into custody and called for medical teams and began the work of figuring out who had sent the killers and why. But Marcus did not see any of that because he had finally let himself fall. He was on the faux ground with his shoulders screaming in agony and his vision swimming with darkness. And he thought that maybe this was what dying felt like, and he hoped that the cubs were okay, because that was the only thing that mattered. Then he felt something warm press against his chest and something sharp but gentle grab his good hand, and a small voice that said, "Do not die, human. You are not allowed to die. My mother would be very angry if you died." Marcus opened his eyes and saw Vareth standing over him with his fangs bared at anyone who came too close. And Sirth was pressed against his side, crying in the way that young Varax cried, which was without sound, but with their whole bodies shaking. And Kethril had climbed onto his chest and was chirping at him like he was trying to give orders. "I am okay," Marcus said, even though he was not sure if that was true. "Are you 3 okay? You saved us," Vareth said. And his voice was strange and thick, like he was trying not to cry too. "You stood in front of the fire and you did not run away. And when they shot you, you kept standing. That is what guards do," Marcus said. "No." Vareth shook his head. "That is not what guards do. Guards run when the danger is too great. Guards look for their own survival first. Guards do not take plasma bolts for children who are not their own." Marcus wanted to argue, but he was very tired, and the medical team was trying to get to him, but Vareth would not let them close. "Please, little one," Dr. Chum said, because she had come running from the surgery when she heard about the attack. "I need to help him or he will lose that arm." Vareth looked at her with his golden eyes, and then he looked at Marcus. And then he did something that made everyone watching hold their breath. He stepped aside. "Save him," the young Varax said. "He is Pack now, and Pack protects Pack." The medical team rushed in and got to work. and Marcus was carried away to the same medical bay where Kethrix was still recovering from her surgery. And the three cubs followed because they would not let him out of their sight later. The station would learn that the attack had been planned by a faction that opposed the treaty between humans and Varax, and they had thought that killing the ambassador's cubs would end the alliance before it began. They had been wrong about many things. They had been wrong about the humans being easy targets. They had been wrong about the guards running away, and they had been very, very wrong about Beatrice and her cast iron pan. But the thing they had been most wrong about was thinking that humans would not fight and bleed and almost die for children who were not their species and not their family, and not anything except three scared little predators who needed protecting. The humans had proven something that day. They had proven that when it came to protecting the young, they were just as fierce as any Varax, maybe even fiercer, because they had no claws or fangs or scales. They just had stubborn hearts that refused to let children be harmed, and sometimes that was enough. Ambassador Kethrix woke to the smell of blood and antiseptic and something else that she could not identify at first. And when she opened her eyes, the light was too bright, and her body felt like it had been taken apart and put back together wrong. "Easy," a gentle voice said. "The surgery went well, but you need to rest. You almost died, Ambassador." Dr. Chun was standing beside her bed with tired eyes and a soft smile. And Kethrix remembered trusting this small human with her life, and she wondered if that had been a mistake. Then she remembered her cubs. "My children." She tried to sit up, but her body would not obey her. "Where are my children? Are they safe? I need to see them." "They are safe," Dr. Chun said. "They are right here, actually. They refuse to leave." Kethrix turned her head, and what she saw made her heart stop beating for just a moment. Her three cubs were asleep in a pile with several humans. Kethrol was curled up in the lap of a human female who had gray hair and kind eyes and who was snoring softly. Sirth was tucked under a blanket next to a young human with dark hair who had her arm wrapped protectively around the Tivoli around the Vidode. Barak's child, and Varth, her eldest, her fierce little warrior, had his head resting on the chest of a human male who was covered in bandages and hooked up to machines, but who was still breathing steadily. The human's hand was resting on Varath's head, right between his horns, in the spot where Varak's mothers touched their cubs to show love. "What happened?" Kethrix whispered, because she did not trust her voice not to break. Secretary Wong appeared at her bedside, and the older human woman looked exhausted. But there was something warm in her eyes that Kethrix did not understand. "There was an attack," Wong said. "Mercenaries came to kill your children while you were in surgery. They thought it would be easy, because they would only have to get through human guards." Kethrix felt rage building in her chest, the pure hot rage of a mother whose cubs had been threatened. And she tried again to rise from the bed. "They failed," Wong said quickly. "Your children are unharmed. Not a single scale was touched." "But it was not easy," she told Kethrix what had happened. She told her about Marcus standing in front of plasma fire and refusing to fall. She told her about Engineer Yuki trapping the attackers with blast doors. She told her about Beatrice and her cast iron pan, and she told her about Varth declaring that Marcus was Pack now. That Pack protects Pack. By the time Wong finished speaking, Kethrix was crying. Vorax did not cry easily. And in fact, most species believed that Varax could not cry at all. But they could, and they did when the emotion was too big to hold inside. "Why?" Kethrix asked, and her voice was rough with tears and confusion. Why would they do this? Why would they bleed for children who are not their own? Why would they risk death for young predators who might grow up to be their enemies? Wong pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down slowly. And she was quiet for a moment, like she was trying to find the right words. "Ambassador, humans spent most of our evolutionary history as prey. And we were not the fastest or strongest or deadliest creatures on our world. And there were many things that wanted to eat us. But you survived, Ketherick said. You survived and you spread across your world and then across the stars. How? We survived because we protected each other, Wong said. And especially because we protected each other's children. She leaned back in her chair, and her eyes went distant, like she was seeing something far away. On Earth. Long ago, a mother could die hunting or fighting or from sickness. And if that happened, her children would die too, because they could not survive alone. So we changed. We became creatures who saw all children as our children. Wong looked at the sleeping pile of Voraks and humans. When a human woman died, her children did not die with her, because the other mothers in the village would take them in and raise them and love them like their own. And those children would grow up and do the same for others. But we are not your species, Ketherick said. We are predators. We are everything your instinct should fear. Why would your people extend this protection to us? Wong smiled. And it was a sad smile, but also a proud one, because it stopped being about species a long time ago. It became about something else, something deeper. And when we see young creatures who are helpless and scared and in danger, something in us wakes up and says those are mine to protect. She pointed at the sleeping cubs. Your children are not Voraks to the humans who are holding them right now. They are just children. And children are sacred to us. All children. Regardless of how many claws they have or what color they're. Scales are. Ketherick's was quiet for a long time. She had been raised to believe that the universe was a hostile place where only the strong survived, and where trusting outsiders was the same as asking to be betrayed. And she had raised her own cubs with the same beliefs, but now she looked at her children sleeping peacefully with humans. Trusting humans, being protected by humans who had bled for them. The one with the bandages, she said finally. That is Marcus, the one who stood in front of the fire. Yes, Wong said. He took a plasma bolt to the shoulder because he would not move. And he kept standing even when he was burning, because if he fell, your children would have been exposed. Will he live? Dr. Chen says he will recover fully, though he will have an impressive scar. Ketherick's made a sound deep in her throat that the translator could not quite capture. But Wong understood it anyway, because gratitude sounds the same in any language. I told him that I would tear this station apart if my children were harmed, Ketherick said quietly. I threatened him and his people and his entire species. And then he almost died to keep my threat from being necessary. Yes. Why did he not hate me for that threat? Why did he not let my children be harmed, just to spite me? Wong reached out and took Ketherick's S-clawed hand in her small human one. And she held it gently, like it was something precious, and not something that could tear her apart. Because that is not who we are, Wong said. We do not punish children for the words of their parents. And we do not withhold protection because someone was afraid and angry and said things they probably did not mean. Ketherick looked down at the human hand holding hers. And she thought about all the times she had been told that humans were weak and soft and easy prey. And she realized that whoever had told her those things had been wrong. The humans were not weak. They were something else entirely. They were the kind of creature who would take a plasma bolt for someone else's child. Who would fight with kitchen implements against armed killers. Who would hold a sleeping predator cub and stroke its head and keep it warm. They were guardians, and Ketherick finally understood why her cubs had trusted them so quickly. Why even Voreth, with all his suspicion and pride, had let the human touch him. It was because the cubs had sensed something that Ketherick herself was only now beginning to see. The humans had looked at 3 small Voraks, and they had not seen aliens or predators or threats. They had just seen children, and for humans, that was enough. That was everything. I owe you a debt, Ketherick said to Wong. All of you. A debt that I do not know how to repay. Wong squeezed her hand. You do not owe us anything, Ambassador. We did what any human would do. We did what was right. Then perhaps, Ketherick said slowly, the treaty we came here to sign should be more than just words on a document. Perhaps it should be something real. Something built on what happened here. Wong smiled. I think I would like that very much. And so, as the station hummed around them and the medical machines beat their steady rhythm and the children slept their peaceful sleep, a predator and a human sat together and began to imagine. A new kind of alliance, not one built on fear or trade or military strength, but one built on trust and the knowledge that sometimes the softest creatures are the ones you want guarding your young. The Galactic Council chamber was filled with representatives from over 100 species when Ambassador Ketherick walked to the speaking platform, and every eye and sensor and sensory organ in the room turned to watch her. She had recovered from her surgery, but she still moved more slowly than before, and there was a new softness in her golden eyes that had not been there when she first arrived at Earth Station Meridian. Behind her stood her 3 cubs, dressed in the ceremonial armor of the Varax Dominion, and they walked with the pride of young predators who knew their worth, but there was something different about them too. Varath wore a small metal pin to his chest plate, a simple circle of metal with a human symbol on it. And when anyone asked him about it, he would say only that it was a gift from a friend. Earth carried a small bag that contained a recipe written in human script. A recipe for something called chocolate cake that the human cook Beatrice had taught her to make, and Kethral, still small and still prone to chasing his own tail, wore a tiny bracelet woven from human hair that the guards on the station had made for him as a farewell gift. The council watched the Varax family with confusion, because predator species did not usually show such obvious affection for prey species, and the gifts they carried made no sense to those who did not know. The story Ketherick reached the speaking platform and looked out at the assembled representatives, and she saw allies and enemies and neutrals. She saw species that feared the Varax, and species that envied them, and species that simply wanted to be left alone. And she saw the human delegation. They were seated near the front, a small group compared to some of the larger empires. And Marcus was there with his arm still in a sling and his shoulders still wrapped in bandages. And beside him sat Dr. Chun and Secretary Wong and Beatrice, who had been given a temporary diplomatic title just so she could attend distinguished representatives. Ketherick began, and her voice filled the chamber like thunder rolling across mountains. I came to Earth Station Meridian to negotiate a trade treaty, a simple agreement about resources and borders and mutual benefit. But what happened there has changed everything. The chamber was silent. We Varax have always believed ourselves to be the ultimate protectors, and we guard our young with a ferocity that has become legend across the galaxy. And we trust no one outside our own blood, because trust is weakness, and weakness is death. She paused and looked at her cubs. When I was struck down by illness on the human station, I had no choice but to leave my children in the care of humans. And every instinct the first possessed screamed that this was wrong, that prey species could not be trusted with predator young, that I was making a terrible mistake. The predator species in the audience murmured their agreement because they understood this fear. They shared this fear. It was built into their very bones. I was wrong. The murmuring stopped. The humans did not see my children as bargaining chips or hostages or threats to be eliminated. They saw them as children, just children, and they treated them with kindness and warmth and protection. Ketherick's voice grew stronger, and when assassins came to kill my cubs while I lay unconscious and helpless, the humans did not run. They did not hide. They did not sacrifice my young to save themselves. She pointed at Marcus. That human took a plasma bolt to the shoulder because he would not step aside, because there was nothing in the universe that could make him abandon the children he had promised to protect. She pointed at Beatrice. That human, a cook, a grandmother, a person with no combat training at all, attacked armed mercenaries with a cooking implement because my youngest had fallen asleep in her lap and she was not going to let anyone hurt him. She pointed at Dr. Chun. That human saved my life with her hands and her knowledge, and then ran to save the human who had protected my children. And she did all of this without asking for anything in return. The chamber was completely silent now, and even the species who had always dismissed humans as weak and irrelevant were listening with new attention. "I have conquered worlds," Ketherick said. "I have led armies and broken enemies, and built an empire that spans 12 star systems. And I have never seen anything like what I saw on that station." She turned to face the full council. "These humans have no claws. No fangs, no natural armor, no venom, no biological weapons of any kind. And yet they threw themselves into fire for children not their own. They bled for cubs they had known for mere hours. They held the line against killers with nothing but kitchen tools and stubborn refusal to let young ones die." Her voice rose to fill every corner of the chamber. "Today, the Varax Dominion formally requests that human protection forces be stationed at all our nursery worlds." The shock that rippled through the council was almost visible. The Varax were asking prey species to guard their most vulnerable places, their children, the future of their entire civilization. It was unthinkable, and yet Ketherick's was not finished. "We make this request not because we are weak, not because we cannot protect our own, but because we have finally found a species whose protective instincts match our own, perhaps even exceed our own." She looked at the human delegation, and her golden eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "We predators finally understand. Humans are not prey. They were never prey. They're something far more dangerous. They are guardians." She let that word hang in the air. "And there is nothing in this galaxy more terrifying than a guardian who has decided that your children are under their protection." The chamber erupted in noise as a dozen species began talking at once. And representatives who had never shown interest in humans before were suddenly leaning forward and whispering to their advisors the Kralith hegemony. Another predator species stood and announced that they too wished to discuss human protection arrangements for their young, the Sisterhood of Vex, who had always kept their offspring hidden from all outsiders. Asked for a private meeting with the human delegation, even the cold calculating merchants of Zethus, who cared for nothing but profit, began making notes about the potential value of human guardian services. Secretary Wong was trying to respond to all the requests at once and failing. And Dr. Chun was being asked medical questions by a dozen different species. And Marcus was just sitting in his chair, looking stunned by what was happening. Varath walked over to him, moving through the crowd of diplomats like they were not even there. And he stopped in front of the human who had almost died for him. "You are invited to my first hunt," Varath said. And his young voice was formal in the way of Varax ceremonies. "This is the highest honor a Varax can give to an outsider. And you have earned it." Marcus blinked. "I do not know how to hunt like a Varax. I will teach you," Varath said. And for just a moment he was not a young predator or a future leader, but just a boy looking at someone he admired. "Pack teaches pack," Marcus smiled, and it hurt his shoulder, but he did not care. "I would like that very much." Behind them, Beatrice was surrounded by a group of young Varax diplomats who wanted to know about the legendary cooking implement that had defeated trained killers. And she was explaining the proper care and seasoning of cast iron while they took notes like she was teaching them the secrets of the universe. Dr. Chun was approached by Ambassador Ketherick herself, and the predator bowed her head to the small human woman. "You held my life in your hands and you saved it," Ketherick said. "And then you ran to save the one who saved my children. You are welcome in the Dominion for as long as you live, and you will be treated as family." Dr. Chun did not know what to say, so she just bowed back and hoped that was the right thing to do. Secretary Wong stood at the center of it all, watching her species suddenly become the most sought-after allies in the galaxy. Not because of weapons or technology or resources, but because of something much simpler. Because they had protected children. Because, when the universe had asked what kind of species humans were, they had answered with blood and bravery, and a grandmother's cast-iron pan. Treaty that was signed that day was not the treaty anyone had expected. It was bigger and stranger and more beautiful. And it bound the Varax and humans together in a way that would last for generations. But the real alliance had been forged earlier, in a small room on a space station. When a human sat down on the floor and let a scared baby predator climb into his lap, that was the moment everything changed. And, somewhere in the records of the Galactic Council, there is a note about that day. A simple entry that reads, "Today we learned why even predators trust humans to protect their young." The answer? It turns out, with simple humans just cannot help themselves when they see a child in danger. Any child at all, something ancient and powerful wakes up inside them and says no. Not while I am here, not while I am breathing, not while there is any strength left in my soft clawless hands, and that, more than any weapon or technology or fleet of ships, is what makes humans the most valuable allies in the galaxy, not because they are strong, but because they are stubborn and kind and utterly, absolutely, completely unwilling to let children be harmed, even if those children have scales and claws, and could probably eat them when they grow up. It does not matter to humans' children. Our children and children are sacred. The end.